Before you decide who someone is, before you write them off as weak, as prey, you should ask yourself one question: what if they're not climbing to survive, but waiting for you to fall? Don't go anywhere. This story will change how you see the people around you. Subscribe and join us, because the quiet ones have the most to say. The sun was a brilliant, unforgiving gold over the Sierra Vista overlook, painting the jagged canyon walls in hues of rust and amber. Below, the world fell away into a dizzying abyss, a 1,000-foot drop into a river that snaked through the canyon floor like a silver thread. The air was thin and clean, scented with pine and dry earth. It was the perfect backdrop for the West Ridge High School annual fall picnic, a day meant for laughter and light-hearted escape from the confines of the classroom. Colorful blankets were scattered across the grassy clearing like patches of a quilt, weighed down by coolers and chip bags. The chatter of hundreds of students mingled with the distant cry of a hawk. On one such blanket, set a careful distance from the boisterous center of the crowd, sat Maya. To anyone who bothered to look, and few did, she was a study in quietude. She was 17, with hair the color of dark honey that she often hid behind, and eyes that seemed to take in too much of the world at once. She wore a simple, faded gray hoodie and jeans. Her posture curved in on itself as if making herself a smaller target. At school, she was a ghost, a whisper in the hallway. She was the girl who ate lunch alone in the library, who always had the right answer in physics, but was too afraid to raise her hand. The story everyone knew, the one that defined her, was the tragedy of her parents. They were aid workers, killed in a conflict overseas when she was 12. The official letter said it was a car accident, a random act of violence. It was a story that bred a certain kind of pity, the kind that quickly curdles into indifference. What no one knew, what was buried under layers of classified files and deliberate silence, was the truth. Her father wasn't just an aid worker. He was Lieutenant Commander James Thorne, one of the most decorated and respected Navy SEALs of his generation. Her mother, Dr. Elena Thorne, was a brilliant trauma surgeon who often volunteered with military-affiliated NGOs. Their deaths weren't random, they were targeted. And Maya, their only child, hadn't been shipped off to a distant relative. She had been absorbed into the only family her father truly trusted, the teams. For the past 5 years, her life had been a paradox. By day, she was Maya Thorne, the shy orphan girl trying to navigate the treacherous waters of American high school. By night, and on countless weekends at a private, secure facility, she was Thorne's daughter, a protege under the fierce and loving tutelage of her father's brothers. In arms, men like Master Chief Grizzly Miller, a man with a voice like grinding gravel and a heart that, for her, was soft as butter. He had taught her things no teenager should ever need to know. How to disarm a man twice her size. How to read a room for threats in 3 seconds. How to control her breathing until her heart rate was a slow, steady drum even in utter chaos. How to fall and how to climb. Ropes are a tool, Maya. Grizzly would growl, his face close to hers as she dangled from a training wall. They are not a crutch. A SEAL uses what's there. The rock, the crack, the friction of your own will. Remember, we don't need ropes to rise. This dual life had carved her into 2 people. The one she showed the world was fragile, designed to be overlooked. The one inside was made of tungsten steel. But today, at the cliff's edge, the steel was feeling strained. The problem had a name, 3 names, and they were currently swaggering across the picnic grounds in matching black and gold varsity jackets. Chad, the quarterback, with a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite and a brain to match. Jake, his wide receiver sidekick, all fast, twitch muscles and cruel laughter. And Brad, the lumbering lineman, whose purpose seemed to be pure, mindless mass. They were the kings of West Ridge High, their status cemented by Friday night touchdowns and a pervasive, unshakable arrogance. For weeks, their attention had been circling Maya. It had started with small things, a misplaced book, an accidental bump in the hallway. But lately, it had escalated. It was as if they'd sensed a crack in her carefully constructed facade, a vulnerability they couldn't resist poking. Chad, in particular, seemed to relish it. He'd call her Orphan Annie, just loud enough for her to hear, a smirk playing on his lips. Today, with the vast, unsupervised wilderness around them, their confidence was at a peak. The first incident happened near the food table. Maya was reaching for a soda when Brad stumbled into her, sending her stumbling and the can clattering to the ground. Oops, he grunted, not sounding sorry at all. Jake laughed, a high, sharp sound. Watch it? Clumsy. Maya had just straightened up, her eyes downcast, the trained part of her brain already running through a dozen ways to disable Brad and put Jakey's head through the picnic table. But the shy girl persona won. She muttered an apology and walked away, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. She felt Grizzly's voice in her head. Patience, Maya. The battlefield chooses you. You don't choose it. She found a measure of peace on a flat, sun-warmed rock near the cliff's edge, far from the main crowd. She pulled out a book, a thick volume on advanced thermodynamics, and tried to lose herself in the orderly world of equations. For a while it worked. The wind whispered through the pines, and the sheer drop a few yards away was just a fact of the landscape, not a threat. She felt the familiar calm of focus settle over her. It didn't last. The shadows of the three boys fell over her page. Heavy reading Orphan Annie, Chad said, his voice dripping with false charm. Trying to calculate how far you'd fall. Jake snickered. Might want to use a calculator. Wouldn't want to get it wrong. Maya didn't look up. Please leave me alone. Her voice was quiet, but it lacked the tremor they expected. Ah, we're just being friendly, Chad crooned. He nudged her backpack with his foot. What else you got in here? Pictures of your dead parents. The air left Maya's lungs. It was a low blow even for them. A cold fury, sharp and clear, began to replace the calm inside her. She slowly closed her book. Just walk away, Chad, she said, her voice low. He laughed, a loud, booming sound meant for an audience. Or what? You'll cry. You'll run to a teacher. He took a step closer, his smirk triumphant. There are no teachers here, Annie. Justice. It was then that Brad, eager to please, reached down and snatched her book. Let's see how this flies, he yelled, and with a grunt of effort, he hurled it over the cliff's edge. They all watched it fall, the pages fluttering like a wounded bird, before it vanished into the vastness below. A profound silence descended upon their little group. For Maya, it was the sound of a line being crossed. The book was a gift from her father. It was one of the few things she had left. She stood up. The movement was not the cowering shuffle they anticipated. It was fluid, economical, and utterly controlled. She turned to face them, and for the first time, she looked Chad directly in the eyes. The Shea girl was gone, burned away by the fire of their cruelty. What was left was something else entirely. Something calm and dangerous. You shouldn't have done that, she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact. Chad, for a split second, was taken aback. Then his bravado returned, fueled by the confusion. Oh, yeah. What are you going to do about it? He shoved her. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough. Her heels were on the very edge of the cliff. The ground crumbled slightly under her weight. A collective gasp went up from a few students who had turned to watch the drama unfold. Their faces were masks of horror. Jake, caught up in the moment, stepped forward and gave her another push. Yeah, how do you like that? It was Brad, wanting to be part of the action, who delivered the final, fateful shove. He put all his weight into it, a mindless, brutal thrust to her shoulders. Maya's eyes met Chad's for one last, searing moment. There was no fear in them. There was pity. And then she was gone, vanishing over the edge without a scream. A dead, suffocating silence fell over the overlook. The cheerful sounds of the picnic seemed to have been sucked into a void. Chad, Jake, and Brad stood frozen at the edge, their smirks wiped away, replaced by a dawning, gut-wrenching terror. They peered over, expecting to see a broken body plummeting into the abyss. They saw nothing. Just the endless drop. She just fell. Jake whispered, his face ashen. We didn't mean. Brad started, his voice thick with panic. Chad, trying to reclaim control, hushed them. Shut up. No one saw anything. We were nowhere near her. You understand, we were at the hot dog stand the whole time. His plan was already forming, a flimsy shield of lies against the crushing weight of what they had done. They stumbled back from the edge, their varsity jackets suddenly feeling like costumes of foolish children. Below the rim, a different reality was unfolding. The moment Maya felt herself falling, years of brutal, repetitive training took over. Adrenaline was a tool, not a master. The initial shock on her face was genuine, a human reaction to betrayal, but it lasted less than a second. As she fell, she twisted in the air, her body orienting itself. Her hands, strong and callous from years of rock climbing at the CL facility, scraped against the cliff face, searching for purchase. It wasn't a sheer drop. The cliff was rugged, ancient and fractured. A few feet down, a narrow, jagged ledge, invisible from above, jutted out. It was no wider than a balance beam. Her feet hit it first, her knees bending to absorb the impact with the precision of a gymnast. She rolled with the momentum, her body slamming against the rock wall, but avoiding a fatal bounce. For a moment, she lay there, pressed against the cold stone, the wind whipping around her. She was alive. She took a slow, deliberate breath, activating the box breathing Grizzly had drilled into her. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Her heart rate began to slow. She assessed her situation. She was on a ledge about 15 feet below the rim. Above her, she could hear the panicked, muffled voices of the bullies, then their retreating footsteps. A cold, grim smile touched her lips. They thought they had killed her. They thought they had won. She looked down. The drop below was still catastrophic, a several hundred-foot fall to the next major outcrop. But she wasn't going down, she was going up. She looked at the cliff face. It was porous rock, pockmarked with cracks and small, sturdy shrubs clinging to life in the harsh environment. It was a climbing wall, a deadly one, but a climbing wall nonetheless. Navy SEALs don't need ropes to rise. She whispered to herself, the words a mantra. She pushed herself up, her fingers probing the rock. She found a solid handhold, then a foothold. She began to climb. It was not the frantic scramble of a victim. It was the methodical, powerful ascent of a predator. Every movement was calculated, every muscle engaged. She used the techniques she had practiced 1,000 times, smearing the rubber soles of her sneakers against the granite for friction, jamming her hands into cracks, using her core strength to hold her body close to the wall. She was a shadow moving against the stone, silent and relentless. Back at the picnic, chaos was beginning to brew. The initial silence had broken into a wave of panicked murmurs. A few students were frantically looking for a teacher. The bullies were trying to act normal, but their pale faces and furtive glances gave them away. The principal, Mr. Davies, a kindly but ineffectual man, was being summoned. It was at that moment that a low, throaty rumble cut through the panic. 2 blacked, out-Ford Raptors, dust-covered and imposing, pulled into the parking lot at the edge of the overlook. The doors opened and 4 men got out. They weren't dressed in uniforms, but their bearing screamed military. They moved with a loose-limbed, economical grace that took up space without trying. They wore jeans, tactical boots, and simple T-shirts or jackets, but their eyes were constantly scanning, assessing, missing nothing. At their head was Master Chief Grizzly Miller, a bear of a man with a close, shaven head and a gaze that could stop a clock. He was supposed to pick Maya up after the picnic for a weekend training session. He'd felt a prickle of unease, a sixth sense honed in 100 firefights, and had decided to come early. He took in the scene in an instant, the panicked clusters of students. The 3 jocks trying to look inconspicuous and failing miserably. The absence of Maya. And the cliff's edge, where a few kids were still peering over, their hands over their mouths. Grizzly didn't run. He walked, his pace deliberate and terrifying. The crowd seemed to part for him. He went straight to the edge and looked down. He didn't see a body, but he saw something else. He saw the scuff marks on the very edge of the cliff. He saw the distinctive pattern of Maya's sneaker tread in the dirt where she'd been standing. And then, his sharp eyes caught a movement on the rock face below the rim. A flash of a gray hoodie. A familiar, determined figure pulling herself upward, hand over hand. A wave of pride so fierce it was painful washed over him, followed immediately by a cold, murderous rage. He knew. He didn't need to be told. He turned from the edge, his face a granite mask of controlled fury. His 3 companions, Tex, Doc, and Ghost, closed ranks around him, reading his expression and understanding instantly. Grizzly's voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried across the entire clearing, silencing the last of the whispers. "Where is my daughter?" Principal Davies hurried over, wringing his hands. "Sir, I'm the principal. We think there's been a terrible accident." "There was no accident," Grizzly said, his eyes locking onto Chad, Jake, and Brad. They looked like deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming tank. "Was there, boys?" Chad tried to bluster. "We don't know what you're talking about. She must have slipped." It was then that a hand scratched and dusty but strong, appeared on the cliff's edge, then another. And then, with a final powerful pull, Maya Thorne hauled herself back over the top. She stood there on solid ground, her clothes torn and smudged with dirt, a shallow cut on her forehead. But she was upright, her breathing steady, her eyes blazing with a fire no one at West Ridge High had ever seen. The gasp that went through the crowd was seismic. It was a miracle. It was impossible. The bullies stared, their jaws slack, their faces a comical canvas of disbelief and sheer, unadulterated terror. They had shoved her off a cliff, and she had climbed back up. Maya ignored everyone else. Her eyes found Grizzly's. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm okay." Then she turned her gaze to the three boys. She didn't say a word. She just started walking toward them. Each step was measured, purposeful. The crowd fell back, creating a path between her and her tormentors. The shy orphan girl was gone forever. In her place was Thorne's daughter. Chad took a step back, his bravado completely shattered. "Stay away from me! You're a freak." Jake and Brad were frozen, their bodies trembling. Grizzly looked at the principal. "You might want to call the police, sir," he said, his voice like gravel. "And an ambulance for these three." He nodded toward the bullies. "They're going to need it." What happened next wasn't a fight. It was a demonstration. As Maya closed the distance, Chad, driven by panic, threw a wild, telegraphed punch. It was the punch of a high school quarterback used to hitting stationary targets. Maya flowed inside the arc of his swing, her left arm deflecting his wrist while her right hand, fingers formed into a spear, struck him precisely in the solar plexus. It was a non-lethal, debilitating blow. All the air left Chad's body in a pained whoosh. He crumpled to his knees, gasping like a fish out of water, his eyes wide with the shock of the impact. Jake lunged at her from the side. Maya dropped her center of gravity, grabbed his outstretched arm, and used his own momentum to send him flipping through the air. He landed hard on his back, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Brad, the biggest of the three, roared and charged like a bull. Maya didn't retreat. She sidestepped at the last second, planting her foot behind his and delivering a sharp, precise strike to the back of his knee. There was an audible pop, and Brad screamed, collapsing to the ground, clutching his leg. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Three high school jocks, the terror of the hallways, were laid out on the grass, moaning in pain and humiliation. They weren't seriously injured, but they were utterly, completely broken. Maya stood over them, her chest rising and falling steadily. She looked at each of them in turn. "You took my book," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "You took my peace. But you could never take my strength. You just never knew where to look for it." The police and paramedics arrived shortly after. The scene was chaotic, but the truth was undeniable. Dozens of students came forward, finally brave enough to speak now that the tyrants had fallen. They told of the shoving, the taunts, the thrown book. The bullies, faced with the evidence and the terrifying presence of Grizzly and his team, confessed everything, sobbing about how they never meant for it to go so far. As Chad was being loaded onto a stretcher, he looked at Maya, who was standing beside Grizzly, a thermal blanket around her shoulders. "What are you?" he whispered, his voice ragged. Grizzly answered for her, his voice full of a father's fierce pride. "She's a survivor, and she's mine." The story didn't end with arrests and expulsions. It ended with a quiet departure. The press wanted the story of the miracle girl, but they were stonewalled by official-looking men in dark suits. Maya Thorne vanished from West Ridge High. The official story was that she had moved to live with relatives back east. The truth was different. A few months later, in a nondescript office in Virginia, Maya Thorne stood before a selection board. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her posture now straight, her gaze direct and confident. She was no longer hiding. On the table before the board lay her file. It was thick. It contained her academic records, her psychological evaluations, and a full report of the incident at Sierra Vista Overlook, classified under national security protocols. The final page was a letter of recommendation. It was signed by Master Chief Miller and several other influential names, and it contained one powerful closing argument. Under extreme life or death duress, subject demonstrated superior situational awareness, flawless tactical execution, and unwavering emotional control. She utilized advanced free climbing techniques to overcome a near vertical ascent under severe psychological stress. She is, without reservation, the most promising candidate I have ever evaluated. Maya wasn't applying to college. She was applying for a waiver, an early entry into a program far more demanding than any university. She was following in her father's footsteps. The bullies had tried to shove her into an abyss. They never knew they were just giving her a launching pad. Because Navy SEALs don't need ropes to rise. And neither does a thorn. Her story is a reminder that the quietest rivers often run the deepest, and the most unassuming people often hide the greatest strength. It makes you wonder about the people you pass every day. What battles have they fought? What secrets do they hold? What cliffs have they climbed when no one was watching? It leaves me with one question, a simple one, to connect us all in this moment. From which part of the country are you watching this video?